Good afternoon. It is the Thursday, October the 22nd edition, episode 20, sorry, Thursday, October 22nd. It's episode 29 of the THCB gang. I'm your host, Matthew Holt, the founder and publisher of the Healthcare blog. Have a fun lineup today. We're having a few, those who were on with us last week, we had a big and noisy crowd. We're going to have a slightly more select and more cerebral crowd today, but maybe we'll see. But I've got a great lineup with a couple of guests, mixing up a bit. So regulars, Maggie Carey from the Carey Global Group, MD and muse to young MDs is what Maggie actually is. Michael Millinson, President of Health Quality Advisors, editor of the award-winning Demanding Medical Excellence from way back when ago, but health quality, care quality and patient safety guru. And then two guests this week, Fad John Maher, who I've known forever, the founder of Inspectos. He runs a digital health consulting group, which is what Inspectos is, and his own podcasts. And Denise Pines, who is happens to be the president of the Medical Board of California, but is also very involved with Fad in a group in their new topic of Fem Aging, which we'll get into what that is all about during the show. But let's go live now. And we will look at, we welcome everyone. I think, Denise, I think you are going to win the prize for being the best dressed with the best, coolest artwork we've had on THCB gang so far. So we'll see about that. But the way we always start this is to go around the horn and ask people what they've been noticing in health and health technology in the last week or so. And then after that, we'll dive into meet our guests a bit more. So let's start. Michael, what have you noticed in the last week or so?
Well, I think we're getting back to normal in terms of COVID, and that rather than just talking about emergency room and people dying, we're talking about who's making money. So we have the California hospitals accused of turning away patients with COVID who didn't have the right insurance. We've got some hospital chains giving back their COVID federal subsidy. We've got people looking at the COVID long haulers, like they finally discovered that AIDS patients were not pariahs, but sources of income, and setting up centers for recovery of COVID long haulers and hospital income. And so we're starting to go back to normal, unless, of course, that second wave comes along and swamps everybody like we're seeing evidence of. But let's not look at that when we're having so much fun making money.
Maggie.
So a couple of things. One is the states that are getting hit hard now are the Dakotas, Montana, Idaho. I didn't go do my annual Rocky Mountain Trek this summer, and I sort of attributed it to, well, it's getting cold up there and people are going inside. And then I read an article that says this is the fallout from the Sturgis Harley Davidson thing the first weekend in August. And one of the problems they had was tracing it, doing contact tracing on that. And if you see the pictures, they expected 250,000. There were 400,000 people there, no masks, no nothing. And so just interesting, because it takes a while for everybody to get infected. And I live in Washington, D.C., where our rates have come up because of the super spreader event held at the White House. The other thing that's interesting is there's a lot of things coming out about the different vaccines and about specificity and selectivity, which is sort of probably beyond most of our comprehension. And I think that the interesting thing is that none of these things are 100% safe. And we don't have the time really with the way that they're fast tracking it to be comfortable that they will work and what their metrics are. So,
yeah, it's quite disturbing that we're going to get into this, and there's still there was some interesting. I'll get into my comments in a second, but there's some interesting stuff around, you know, what are we doing with the vaccines, what are we doing with treatments, and that's what's given heightened interest because of what happened to the president in recent weeks. Fad, welcome to the show. What have you been looking at the last couple of weeks, just in general in healthcare?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I live in New York, and so we have been dealing with COVID, and we've had a big surge, and now we're starting to get a resurgence. And we've been really good at keeping the levels down, but things are starting to tick up. And so, that's certainly something that locally I'm looking at. The other thing is looking at what's happening with potentially the ACA, and reading that there was an interview that it's controversial interview, I guess, where essentially the president admitted that getting rid of ACA would be a really good idea. At least he thought that would be the case. And the thing that I constantly think about are the people with COVID and how they're going to be affected by this. And so I think it's going to be a really big deal for a lot of people, obviously going into the election and things that are happening there with ACA. So those are a couple of things. The other thing is just looking at how people are starting to mobilize around ACA, and in the work that I do, looking at just how many people are looking at COVID and all these things is a tremendous opportunity. And that's kind of what I'm hearing as well. So certainly has been interesting last couple of weeks, in terms of healthcare and what's happening with COVID.
Yeah, there was some, I would say, emotional discussion on the last couple of THCB games about the ACA and future Justice Barrett and her contribution to its downfall, and what's going to happen on November the 10th when they discuss it and thereafter, and what might a potential Biden administration, should there be one, do. Denise, what have you been looking at the last couple of weeks?
We've been looking at how we're going to implement the vaccine in this state once it is available. So one, looking at what bill the pharmacy has put in place in order to vaccinate, looking at all the places that we're going to be able to, centers, hospitals, regular doctors, other non-traditional places in order to vaccinate the 40 million people that are in this state. We're also looking at something simple as Halloween and the impact that Halloween could have, especially in Los Angeles, where I live, where we have about 50,000 people who do this parade down Hollywood, and whether or not those people are still going to show up, even though everyone has been told we're not having Halloween. So that could be disastrous. We can see that people are not listening. People are not taking precaution, and people are fatigued, frankly. They're mask fatigued. They're in their home fatigued. And we know that there's nothing coming around soon that's going to change that fatigue in particular. And we're coming up upon other holidays that really are holidays where people gather for longer periods of time.
Yeah, it's we have some interesting stuff going on right now, and I think that the return to schools, which in California is a big deal. And I was talking to my family in England, and their schools are all back, and their kids are all running around without masks and just doing regular stuff. And the Europeans now are all having a separate second wave. In fact, it's getting faster there than it is here. So we still have a long way to go in this whole COVID thing. My comment for the week is that I noticed that that it's all, we talk about, Michael, back to business as usual. University of Virginia, which last year got busted in a big sort of scandal by the Kaiser family, Kaiser Health news, for coming after people's homes and liens on their homes, what kind of stuff. So they found a couple of examples where Virginia Tech actually it took back, or it actually hired a company and stopped and went to every courthouse in Virginia and got rid of the liens, which is actually a lot of bureaucratic effort. University of Virginia, of course, wasn't bothered to do that. They're still, even though their CEO left last year and they've had a bunch of interim CEOs, they've been coming after people. So I did think it was quite remarkable. They came after a house painter who was making 25 grand a year and put a lien on their house. So they lost most of their money when they came to sell it. And of course, the CEO was only making $600,000 a year as a state employee. So a lot of business as usual in healthcare and hospital care is still going on. With that, let's dive in a bit to me, I guess. So Fad, I want you to say a little bit about what you do at Inspectos, and then we'll dive into Denise because she's got such an interesting background in her work. But Fad, tell us a little bit about what you're looking at on a day-to-day basis.
So yeah, I work on a day-to-day basis with a range of companies trying to figure out their innovation strategy and how to actually do business and really new ways using digital. So you and I remember, Matthew, I mean, there was a lot of talk about what we could do, what we should do, and now there's a lot of talk about, okay, here's what we need to do and how do we actually make money from all of this. And so I spend my days working a lot on helping companies answer those questions, everything from who should we partner with, to what types of trends should we pay attention to what does a financial model look like, over the next 3 years for an organization trying to implement these in a way that's meaningful. So it's a lot of implementation related stuff, which is great. It just took, 7 to 10 years to get there.
Oh, no, 25,
Yeah.
but don't worry.
25, yeah.
Tell us in like 2 sentences about the database that you run as well.
Sure. Yeah. So I have a database called DigiHealth Informer, which Matthew, you and I have spoken a lot about that. It has now 78 million data points on the global digital health landscape. So everything from investments to partnerships to news items to academic papers. And so that database is utilized by clients to drive their innovation strategies, because it's just too much work to try to keep up with all this stuff. And so the platform takes the data in real time and organizes that information. And then clients can access it through custom research, or some clients have actually implemented custom implementations of the platform to be able to keep track and to assess a lot of this activity that's going on in digital health from around the world. So thanks for that.
Very cool. We'll dive into some of your thoughts about that in a minute. And then I know you and Denise have been working on some other stuff, which we'll get into in a second. But Denise, just tell us a little bit about your background. I know you work with Tavis Smiley.
Yes.
In a while, and you're also on the MLK, the Martin Luther King Foundation board down in Los Angeles. Tell us a bit about, and Ian Morrison, who's sometimes on this show, he's on. I'm not sure which board is which, but he's on another part of the Martin Luther King Foundation board, and that's what he's doing great work in since sort of the rebirth of that hospital. So tell us a little bit about what you've been doing.
Oh gosh, I've been doing a lot, but mostly, well, my board work has been really a lot because, obviously when the COVID crisis happened, one of the things that we needed was more doctors. So we, try to recruit doctors to come out of retirement, advance some medical licenses really quick, get nurses out as well. So that was kind of like the initial, crazy. Of course, with the executive order, doing a lot of waivers so that doctors didn't have to worry about things like renewing their license, taking CMEs, so they could focus on the patients that were coming through. So now we're kind of through all of that. So now I can focus a little bit on some other things that I participate in. I'm also sit on the admissions committee for a medical school. So looking at, how do we, now that we've had COVID, is there a little bit of different learning that we need to do with medical students to be prepared for pandemic? There is not a lesson in pandemic in, when you're going through medical school. So looking at whether or not curriculum needs to change to address things that we just didn't think could actually overwhelm an entire world because we hadn't seen it in such a long time, or at least in modern day. In terms of my work on with the Martin Luther King Foundation, which is attached to the Martin Luther King Community Hospital, it's the funding arm. It's a really unique story. It was a story of a hospital that closed down due to mismanagement and a lot of unfortunate deaths, revitalized by with new funding and a partnership that was both public and private. To hold it accountable in a unique way. It's the first public-private county facility that opened. It's state-of-the-art. They built the hospital from the ground up, right next to the hospital that's still existing, but non-functional. And they've just been doing revolutionary things there. I mean, they took a mindset of that they were the anchor to the community when it came to economic empowerment, as well as health and well-being, right? And so if your lens or your mission is different, you view the community and how you're taking care of them in a totally different way. They never see themselves as not having something. If they need a new CT scan, they figure out, how do we get that? Is there somebody rich that we know? And there's lots of rich people in Southern California. And they go out and talk to somebody, and next minute, they've got a $2.5 million CT scan that they didn't have, but they need. So they operate with this very unique mindset, and their goal right now is to eliminate diabetes in a community of 1.3 million consumers that are African American and Latino dominant. So that's going to be interesting when the number one surgery at the hospital is amputation due to diabetes.
Yeah, I actually did an interview on THCB this week with John Bloom from a company called Podimetrics, which has got a mat you stand on that sort of tell you whether you have a foot ulcer, and there's a couple other companies in the sort of, I'm sure you know far well, the folks called Siren Care, who have a sock that you can put on, and there's all kinds of technological solutions for that. But I think in the end, it's as we know, it's an educational and a sort of cultural mission that we've got to deal with in many communities across America. So one thing that I did notice that you and Maggie both share history, and Maggie, I think it's your history, and Denise, you're currently of being on a medical board, and it's not something we discuss a lot in healthcare, but can perhaps one of you could say, what the hell is a medical board and what does it do? Perhaps Maggie, you tell us about your time with the Colorado Medical Board, and please tell us a bit about what you're doing in California.
Well, you know, the medical board, I mean, for us, it's the oldest board in our state. It was formed in 1876. We have currently 23 boards in our state. They all are under the Department of Consumer Affairs. So the basis for our being is to ensure and protect the healthcare of the consumers of California. And we do that by licensing appropriately the right doctors and regulating those licenses when those doctors aren't, you know, doing what they're supposed to do. So that's sort of the basis, and constantly looking at law and regulation to ensure that we can continue to provide good health care in the state.
Maggie?
Very similar in Colorado. It's the Licensing and Disciplining Board agency. In Colorado, it's under the Department of Regulatory Affairs, or DORA. And it's very interesting. I mean, if with a little glass of wine, a little persuasion, I can tell you some fabulous stories. I'm sure Denise has heard the same. Like, you can't believe.
You can't believe it.
You can't believe it.
It's better than TV.
It's
better
actually
than TV.
Okay, I think one of you has to tell us one. No, come on.
I'll tell you one.
Okay.
I'll tell you actually a quick one. A guy came in with his wife. He tried to shoot her, and she was there to support him to get his license. But the more interesting story is a doc, OBGYN, was outside of Denver someplace, I won't mention which, and he, two of his ladies were in labor. One was delivered by a nurse, the other one by a doctor passing by, and he was found in one of the stalls with a needle in his arm. He almost died, but he was saved. We only found out about it these are reportable events that the chief medical officer or the VPMA, Vice President of Medical Affairs, or the CEO of the hospital are supposed to let the board know, and they didn't. Here's the kicker. We took his license away for a certain amount of time, I don't remember. He took it to the administrative law judge to appeal it. And the ALJ, administrative law judge, gave him his license back because he said that other than some momentary discomfort, the two women did not suffer, that he didn't deliver.
Well, Michael, I want to grab you in here because you've, over the years, said some things about the physicians and the practice and professionalism. How do you think the medical boards have done, and what kind of reforms from your perspective in patient safety would you like to see?
Well, the medical literature will tell you that medical boards are as good at protecting patients as the savings and loan industry is as protecting investors in real estate. And the difference being is that the medical boards have people with more degrees on them than the people who are in this S&L industry. I mean, you know, Maggie is wonderful. Denise, you obviously are too. Medical boards, in terms of protecting consumers, are pretty much worthless and pretty much appointed by medical politics, that the local medical societies decide who to appoint it. There is no evidence whatsoever in any way, shape, manner, or form that doctors are good at self-discipline, in part because of legal fears, in part because of you know, the way the profession pressures people. And the M&M conferences, all of it, none of it's worth anything, except occasionally in sporadic kind of ways. And, you know, but because physicians are highly prestigious individuals and nobody wants to take them on, they persist. And because we as consumers all want to trust our doctor, who of course must be good, we as consumers don't care. So just like nursing homes, we don't pay them anything and we have nursing home scandals regularly. And then we go on, we have them again. Same thing with medical boards. Every time any investigative journalist looks, the stories come up and then we go our merry way. So it's nice they're there. They're, you know, like I said, worth as much as savings and loan self-regulation. Sorry, guys.
That's okay. I get beat down by patient advocates all the time. I get called names, so I'm used to it. I'm used to the.
I would never call you. In all seriousness, and I mean this in all seriousness, it's not something that's personal. One of the things, you know, but doctors trying to do your job. One of the things that I did not appreciate and have not appreciated until even after being in this field a long time is the degree to which the physician culture pushes good people just to act in certain ways. The way people at magazines say things are not reported and everything. There's just a cultural issue, and all professional groups need outsiders, and the medical boards could use outsiders too. I mean, that's really all it is. It's not bad intentions. It's not bad people, and that's really the problem. If you look at some states, like Texas or some other places, probably Illinois, God knows, we have a few issues with politics. But in some states, you know, it certainly is all inside baseball and people have no intention of disciplining up their colleagues. I'm sure that's not the case in Colorado or California, but the board still has not turned out to be an effective mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely are things that can be improved. I can only speak about the board that I sit on in California, and we have been very progressive. I mean, we have an app. We're the only board that still has an app where patients can track their doctors and see what is happening, any kind of an offense that's happened, it automatically lets them know. So we've been trying to be really transparent. We passed the only bill, there's no other state that's done this yet, called the Patient Safety Advocacy Act, which is where if a doctor is on probation for particular issues, that they have to let their patients know. They have to write them all a letter. When I call to make my appointment, you have to tell me exactly that the doctor is on probation and what it is for. We keep.
Has anybody else followed you? Has any other state followed your lead?
No other state has followed our lead. No one's
How long ago
no one's done the patient safety. These are all mostly recent regulations in the last couple years. I mean, they've taken, you know how it is. It takes years to even get something like this passed. I mean, can you imagine that we actually got that patient safety act passed, where the doctor has to tell the patient, I did something wrong?
Amazing.
Right? And that and we spot check to make sure you do that. So we're really becoming much more progressive. The doctors are progressive in this stance. Of course, you know, the way our board is made up, there's 8 doctors and 7 public members. I'm a public member.
Okay.
Right. I'm a public member. I've been leading as president for 3 terms.
Wow.
I came in with, you know, meeting with all of the doctor associations saying that I am patient first. And how do we work together with a patient first mindset? And that if you want the medical profession and the doctors to, you know, to be good doctors, then we have to get rid of the bad doctors. And you know who those are. We have to stop protecting them. So we've taken a different approach in the state.
I was a member of in the late 80s, early 90s. And I have to say, for every case like the one I just told you, that was way several standard deviations. There was some good work done. And we too, even in those times, we only had 2, but we had 2 members at large, public members, non-docs. So I think that this, with the advent of information available online, I think it's been a lot harder for docs to just go from we were in the days that docs would go from one state to another,
Right.
and there was no way we could check on them. And those days are gone.
So I've been listening to an interesting podcast series from Michael Lewis called Against the Rules about the referees in American life. He hasn't done one yet, I think, about medical boards, but perhaps he should. That's an interesting transition. You should get the two of you on there at least. Very interesting. So I do have one question. I don't even know this, and I've been in healthcare a while, but things like medical state licensing and changes to state licensing, interstate compacts, that's come into a lot of discussion lately, obviously with the increase in telehealth and the desire to get more doctors and the whole remote monitoring business that we've been talking about. There's a lot of this, obviously that was scrubbed for a while. It's going to come back. The question around, can you do a telehealth visit to a doctor in another state? Is that a role that medical boards play in at all, or are they just purely about enforcing discipline on currently licensed doctors?
So that's interesting, because I was on the first meeting of the Federation of State Medical Boards because of telemedicine. And I only left the board because I joined the Clinton administration, and that would be I couldn't do anything else. But
so this is recent history, right? Go on.
Long ago history, early 90s or mid 90s. So one of the things that it's interesting because every state says we're the really good, the best medical board there is, right? And there's been a decades long attempt to have national licensure, because with telemedicine, is the patient going to the doctor through the technology, or is the doctor going to the patient? Most medical boards say the doctor is going to the patient, and so should be licensed in that state.
Have you seen any change in that, Denise? Have there been?
I mean, we haven't supported that because we feel that our licensing requirements are much stricter. We also feel that we're the largest licensor in the country. We license 141,000 doctors. No one even comes close to that. And so the way the PAC is set up is that the representation on their board, their governing board, doesn't allow for what makes up our state. We feel that we need to have more people to be on that board in order for us to feel comfortable. So we definitely have some issues, and we brought that forth, but the PAC moved forward anyway. And that was years ago, at least 4 or 5 years ago. So there are states who are very engaged, and slowly there are states coming on board.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you talk about. I mean, there are obviously lots of areas where states have incredible rights, and some small states can hold things up. There's this thing called the Electoral College you may have heard of, which has got some issues about how states operate, and this thing called the Senate, by the way, a lot of interest. But I mean, in the companies I talk with, especially some of the startups who are trying to figure out a multi-state or a national strategy to deliver very specific types of care. I was talking to one about dealing with addiction and eating disorders the other day. I mean, they have a couple of doctors, and how do they manage to be able to have managed a few patients per state when they have patients nationwide? This is a big problem for them, and I think it's one of these things that over time has got to be figured out. Although being healthcare, it'll be slow and take a while.
So can I ask you a question about that, Matthew? And I'm curious because California and Colorado are both very attractive states for retirees or for snowbirds or whatever. To what extent do you, Denise and Maggie, think that some of the resistance to national licensure is because of protecting the doctors who are full-time in that state, like Florida doesn't want retirees? And what Matthew's talking about, if you start to have national licensure, I mean, what does that do to local practice, I guess?
I don't know.
I mean, I think it's a good point. I mean, the price of doctors in this state is astronomical, right? I mean, so if I am in this state, I really can't afford to go to a great specialist, and there's a great specialist, say in Colorado or Minnesota or some other state where the fee isn't like this. I'm sure that becomes very attractive. I don't think in our state that we're as concerned about something like that. I mean, given just the amount of people who are licensed.
Sure.
Yeah, but yeah. I should also say too that we don't have a diversion program. So we don't have a program where when a doctor, a doctor receives a complaint and we're going through the investigative process, and all of a sudden they decide that they're going to go into a diversion program, which means that they are going to admit I'm an alcoholic or a drug addict, and to bypass the discipline by going into a program for X amount of time, to say I have, now I'm no longer this drug addict or this alcoholic. We don't have that, and we're not going to have that. We had it at one time, way before my time, probably has been 14 years now or 15 years, and it did not work.
All right. So, well, we don't talk a lot about medical books, but pretty interesting discussion.
Yeah, it's interesting. You never really
just because I had Boo Buzz on with Michael, I thought I had to stir the pot a little bit there. But let's change tack. Let's change course a little bit now. Wanted to get Fard to talk a bit about some of the work you've been doing, some of the work you've been doing with Denise. And this is about a topic which we don't hear much about, but it came out right at the start, and you guys are calling this the Fem Aging report you put out. Fard, you and I over the years, and Michael and everyone on this course, looked at a lot of new tech companies and a lot of money going to various areas, whether it be diabetes here or new types of clinics there or what have you. And there is, this notion of thing called Fem Health, which is a lot of new companies coming on board. But I think the premise that you guys started with is most of this is talking really about fertility, pregnancy, and early childhood care. And you've come up with a hot new study. So, Fard, just say a bit more about it, and then I'll let you and Denise talk a bit about what you've come up with.
Sure. So, actually, speaking about companies and there's been a really hot over the last few years, a lot of focus on this area called FemTech. And last year, Denise and I were having a conversation, and I was actually showing her some of the data from the DigiHealth Informer platform. And we were taking through the companies that were FemTech companies, and almost every one of those companies was focused on fertility, contraception, and parenthood. And the big question that Denise and I posed to each other was, well, where are the solutions for women that are over 40 that are not having children anymore? And and so we said, well, are there any solutions? And so I started to do some research, and we started to get more and more into it. And we realized that there's this tremendous women's health gap between the focus on, obviously it's very important, fertility is huge, contraception, periods, parenthood, all those things. I'm a parent, it's still very important. But at the same time, there was less of a focus on the needs of women above the age of 40. And so Denise and I have been working on women's health issues in this area for some time. And we said, well, what can we do about this? How can we raise awareness and attention on this issue? And so that's when we decided to launch what we call the Fem Aging Project, which is focused on research, innovation, and education on the issues that women over the age of 40 are facing related to their health and well-being. And so we conducted a national survey in the US of 1,000 women. Basically, is a very long survey looking at the types of health issues that they're concerned about, and then also looking at the innovations that they're actually interested in. And so we found some really, really interesting stuff. And so we published a 70+ page report called the Fem Aging 2020 report. And we published a follow-up study called Fem Aging in the COVID-19 era, which has some really interesting data as well. So, our rallying cry for this is that women's health is not just about fertility, and that we need to focus on issues related to menopause and vaginal health and bladder health. And I'll let Denise kind of talk a bit more about that, but that's really where this project came from.
That's great. Denise, tell me a bit about what you found and what the issues are, and especially the issues that are not being properly addressed. I assume that you wouldn't be talking about this if it was all fine and dandy.
Well, I think overall women are concerned whether or not they're going to be able to be active, healthy, and independent as they age. I think we don't show women more vibrant in our media, in print, or just even having conversations with leaders who are older women and showing them to be vibrant, right? We do get to see Nancy Pelosi, And we're all excited about that, but we need to see more of that for women to feel this way. Some of the other things that we found was that we also looked at women of color. And women of color tend to be left out of reports that look at technology and in their association with them. And so we found that they're even 11% higher, like even more concerned about themselves. And I think it's because they don't see themselves as being vibrant and healthy as they get older. Some of the surprises we had was the preferences that women had. For example, Asian women were concerned more about thinning hair. Latino women were concerned about their sexual health. And actually, Black women were concerned more about how do they manage stress during this time. So we saw a lot of really interesting things, including the large menopause treatment gap in the healthcare system. So as Michael was talking about how the healthcare system is, I mean, 60% of women who are in menopause, only 11% of them are getting treatment. And when you look at women of color, it goes down to 6%. So 60%, right, looking for treatment, only 11% getting it. If you're a person of color, it's down to 6%. So really the report, it was startling. I mean, we didn't even expect that. I don't know what we were expecting really, but that part of the data we weren't. We were a little shocked, honestly. So the healthcare industry itself is failing women who are 40 plus.
So what do you, I mean, I don't know what you come up with in terms of recommendations, but there sounds to me there's an opportunity here, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's also a policy gap here, or is it a culture gap? I don't know what you would say, because I assume, if you're telling me that of the 60% of women looking for this, only 11% are getting it, a bunch of the 49% there must have good insurance and must have the ability to get the stuff, but they're not getting what they need, right? So is there kind of a policy issue here, a culture issue? What buttons do we need to poke to improve this before we start thinking about cool apps on your phone?
Yeah, so from one of the things that we were really focused on, and this comes out of, I wrote a book, co-authored the book called E-Patient 2015. You remember that, Matthew? And one of the things that people said was, it's great, we have all this information, but what do we do with this? So one of the things that we really wanted to do was to provide people who were interested in innovating in this area with a roadmap to not only say, well, here are the problems, but here are the solutions. And the way we did that was to actually pose the questions to women and say, what are you actually interested in looking at it not only from a general population, but looking at it from a ethnic and racial perspective. And so what we did is we said, well, what are the major things that you're interested in and concerned about? And so the path forward is kind of a three-pronged path forward. The first is for people that have money, who are investing in these opportunities. Certainly, we know that there's a huge amount of money going into fertility and contraception and those types of solutions. But what people who are, who are investing in these solutions need to understand is that the women above 40 have just as much economic power as the women who are below 40. And so there's a tremendous opportunity to develop innovations and products and services for them. And there's a roadmap for that. The second thing, I think, is to listen to what these women are saying. Denise mentioned the issue of stress and anxiety. And we saw this issue really, really exploding with COVID-19. And we see differences in how Hispanic and African-American women are viewing their stress and viewing their anxiety. We also see that they're very much focused on issues like incontinence and vaginal health. And these are issues that people tend not to want to discuss. So the second area is, if you're an innovator and actually developing these products and services, one of the things that we hear is people don't know how to even approach this. How do we speak to these women? How do we reach them in appropriate ways? How do we convince them that we're actually on their side? And so the report and the research provides a path forward for people trying to develop these innovations. And the third thing we're trying to do is to, from an educational perspective, and this is the reason we call it Fem Aging. That was a very conscious choice. Denise and I came up with that term. And people were struggling against that when we were talking about it. They say, well, why don't you just call it, female health aging or something like that? And we said, no, we want to put fem aging right there. And so part of it is to communicate about this in ways that break down barriers and from a mental perspective in terms of actually thinking this is important. So to kind of recap, the first is to put more money into this area and recognize the economic opportunity. The second is to listen to what these women are saying about what they actually want and work to deliver that and figure out how to do that. And the third is to not be afraid to communicate about these issues. And so some people may be sitting here wondering, I'm a guy, why am I sitting here talking about these issues? And it's because I have a wife, I have a daughter, I have a mother, and I see these issues on a day-to-day basis. And so that's what animates me to really want to focus on this. And so, it does require us to actually be willing to talk about it. And so we think the Fem Aging Project and being aging positive is a way to get past those mental barriers and to start to educate ourselves about what that means.
Fascinating. Maggie, I know this is a long, long way in the future for you, but
I'm there.
No, I mean, seriously, you spend a lot of time, obviously, professionally looking at this and helping doctors with this, but also going through this as a woman, as a patient. What do you think? What do you think about this sort of invisible group?
So interesting, because as I was listening to this, I was being recruited at one point to be the CEO of a company that had this sort of combination vibrator, fix the muscles, help you get a better orgasm thing. And it was interesting because, and it was about the size of a tampon. And so, but Fard's right. People don't want to talk about it. And there's a lot of things that happen. I think this is a huge place in the market. I think one of the keys is, for me, I mean, I have a group of women friends who are docs or in the healthcare field. And so I can talk with them about that. I think it's the confidentiality, at least, that they want in the beginning.
Can I ask a quick question, Matthew?
Please.
And one thing that struck me, by the way, that was really good, because the writing I've done on patient empowerment, and you talked far about e-patients, there's a lot of just glossing over different ethnicity. And I thought that was great. If you look at just overall how, if you're talking about having conversations with your doctor about anything, Black, Hispanic, coming from an Asian background, right? There's just a lot of not paying attention to that. People do age or whatever and don't, and not even to mention race and ethnicity. So that was terrific that you did that. The only thing that, Denise, you said that I sort of said, well, I'm not sure that's true, is when you talked about images of seniors not being active. In fact, what a lot of the complaint is, if you look at advertising, what do you see? All the drug ads, somebody has 47 diseases and they're entering the senior Olympics and running marathons with their grandkids, right? Or you look at AARP and you go, why don't you look like Jane Fonda at 80, huh? Right? And so that in a sense, what we see is not lack of active seniors, but everybody who is at the senior living center or the ads for the drug companies or everything is like having way more fun than we are, right? Like when you're younger, they're having more sex. When you're older, they're having more grandkids. And so I'm wondering whether it's we have to be careful about unrealistic body images for people.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, but we're living longer. So people are living longer. If I'm going to live to 92, I like to be active and independent while I do that, right? And to your point, when we do see images of older people, to your point, it's attributed to drugs. Not on a TV show with a whole family and then showing that person being active and going and doing a marathon with, say, the grandchild. We're not seeing storytelling in this way. So when I say that visual, that's typically the visual I'm talking about. And definitely not in print visual, unless it's an older magazine like AARP, or a story about old people at some point in time. But in general, you just don't see that. And when we think about, the oldest millennial right now is 39 years old. So when they're about to, if that's a woman, she is entering into perimenopause, right? And so, so that's not, we don't think of millennials as old people. but they're and they don't think of themselves that way. So hopefully their mindset will, when they, kind of come into this, will change. However, having been, sitting on a admissions committee for a medical school, I see what the curriculum is. And when you look at the curriculum for women's health, it, kind of has a stopgap of time, typically just right around what we've been talking about, fertility and birth, and maybe shortly thereafter. But the care of a woman in her life cycle, right, in her life journey, is not part of the curriculum at all, even with gynecologists. Just because you have a gynecologist doesn't mean that they really understand everything that's going on with you. If they haven't been staying up on taking the latest CME kinds of courses, they could be behind in the kind of treatment that they begin to have for you when you first come with menopausal symptoms. So this is really, a big deal. And part of it is that, it's a taboo issue. It's one of those things where, a guy goes, oh, I don't want to hear that, or women have a particular sense of self when they're no longer fertile. Like, where am I still feminine? Am I still worthy? So we kind of have these clashing of mindsets. And so Matthew had mentioned, is this culture? I think, yes, it's absolutely culture. The culture of how we think generally about old people, and whether they're still relevant or whether or not they're still productive and giving to society. And we've had so many examples of people who start life at 50 and have large companies or become worldwide speakers or come up with a new innovation. We find even these young tech companies, what do? When they start to grow, they have to go get someone who's older, someone who's experienced, someone who understands, someone who's level-headed, right? In order to help that company to become the company that it needs to be.
So I just want to jump in here with something about women in their 90s, because I'm in a situation where I have many friends who have sisters and or mothers who are in their 90s. And some of them I love to see, and some of them not so much. And so I was sort of thinking about on one of my walks last week, okay, so what is it? So the ones that are crabby generally have a decrease in their sensory perception. So they don't hear well, they don't see well, and they feel isolated. And the ones that I love to see are out there, doing the gardening and running around and funny and keeping up. And so I think there's I don't know what to do about the vision and the hearing loss, but I think this is a critical issue, because if you're isolated with your senses, it's hard to continue to be a productive member of society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's what. Oh, I'm sorry, Matthew.
I'm actually going to come to you in a second, Bob, but just going to say Charlotte Yeh from AARP is the medical director at AARP, has talked to me a lot about this, and she's consistently says there's one thing she can fix as people get older. It's making sure hearing is good, and you're actually seeing some innovation in hearing aids and that kind of stuff. But yes, that's a pretty big problem. But I was going to come to you, Bob, particularly because we don't have that much time left, but I'd love to hear about, so what are we going to see? We've seen rafts of digital health companies in all kinds of areas, do all kinds of things. As you said, you went out and found a bunch, but there haven't been that many that have really raised a lot of money or done this stuff or the other. What kinds of companies or approaches are we going to see to fix all the problems we just heard about from Denise?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did in the report is that we selected 20 companies that we call the Fem Aging Tech 20. And Fem Aging Tech are innovations, and they're not just devices. Okay, that's what I want everybody to understand. It's clothing, it's beauty aids, it's vaginal aids, it's bladder aids, right? It's about all of these innovations that are being developed that make quality of life better for women as they go through these changes. And so, in terms of what we're cataloging this now, and the basic areas are in areas of beauty, in areas of sexual health, in clothing. There's a fantastic company that I constantly rave about that has a cooling clothing that cools the body if someone's having a hot flash, or devices that help with that. And so I think what we're going to be seeing are areas in mental health and beauty, vaginal health, bladder health. It was just a company that Startup Health funded that is now in stores right now across Target with an incontinence aid. And so we're going to be seeing more and more of these companies emerge that are dealing with pelvic and vaginal and bladder and beauty and sexual health. And, you know, all these things that I'm saying, Matthew, are not things that people are comfortable talking about, you know. And so I think what we're going to see is more and more of these companies emerge, and people become more and more comfortable saying things like, yeah, there's a large proportion of people that have issues with incontinence. How are you going to solve that? And so from an innovation perspective, that's one of the things that we're doing. And before I close, I should say that from an educational perspective, we're holding an event next week called Beyond Fertility, which is at femaging.com/beyond fertility. And we're having people to come on and talk about the investment thesis, to talk about innovating for these populations, to talk about why there is a women's health gap. So if anyone's interested in that, they can attend that event. It's absolutely free. Next Thursday, the 29th, femaging.com/beyond fertility, and they can attend that event. And that's going to be another opportunity to learn from people who are dealing with these issues right now. So thank you, Matthew, for that opportunity to talk about what we're doing next.
And that's 12 o'clock Eastern, I believe. Next
12 o'clock Eastern next week. And beyondfertility.com, femaging.com/beyond fertility to sign up. And it's in about 6 days.
We'll put a link to that in the chat about this. And thank you for not clashing with THCB gang, which happens later in the day. Denise, just quickly to come back to you on that. We've had a lot of struggle already. It's getting better, as we discussed with sort of COVID, of getting some of these innovations into regular, good old medical practice. And I know Fem Aging and Fem Aging Tech isn't just about medical practice, but how do you go about, you know, talking to the healthcare systems and the doctors that you're working with, and you're talking with? How do you work, sort of get this kind of new idea of how we got to treat this indivisible group differently? How do you work? How do you help fix that in the medical culture?
You know, a couple ways. So one of the things I'm working on is in this state first, I'm going to start here, is working to see if we can get curriculum about women's health around her life stage, and that every medical student has to take this class, no matter if you're trying to be a neurosurgeon or whatever. Because you need to know, if you're a neurosurgeon, you still need to know, like, what happens to a woman's body as she gets older, what happens to her brain, right? What becomes the chemical imbalance that could be causing something that you're looking at with her. If you're not taking all of her in that sense, you can't really be treating her effectively. So that's what I'm working on right now with Stanford, UCLA, USC, and a couple of the other medical schools. So that's something that's really big. Also, talking with doctors and providing them with information. A lot of doctors that I talk to, a lot of women go to general practitioners because they may not have access to a gynecologist. It's not like there's a gazillion of them. So they go to a general practitioner who might be that person who's delivered their babies. And that's really where their focus is. But as they get older, really hasn't developed or studied enough about how the woman's body is evolving. And so the first course is to give them, is to call it hormone deficiency, and give them estrogen. Or it could be like, just wait it out. I mean, can you imagine going to a doctor and you're having hot flashes and vaginal dryness, and they're like, wait it out. Wait it out until when exactly? Until I die? But this is how the medical, and I'm not beating down on the medical industry, but this is how they deal with women who are older. So having more conversations, educating those doctors, providing them with very detailed information about what happens to women as they get older, what are the different symptoms that you should be looking at. There's at least 44 different symptoms. So that's kind of what it is that I'm doing as an individual, and then educating the women, educating the women so that they are empowered to speak up and speak to their doctor. There was a woman who, I do an event called Wise Paws, and a woman came to that event. We did it last year on a Saturday, and she wasn't feeling great at the event. And she kept hearing over and over and over again, listen to your body, listen to your body. And she decided to go to the hospital. She decided to go to the ER. And she was diagnosed with something that if she had come in 2 days later, she would have died, right? So just feeling empowered that to simply listen to yourself and to stand up for yourself when you do go to the doctor. And we do have to recognize how doctors have very little time with patients today. And so how do we help the patient to be better prepared for the doctor visit, right? What kind of terminology can we give them that syncs up with how the doctor thinks about stuff, right? Mild, moderate to severe symptoms, aches that are dull or sharp, things like that can go a long way with you getting diagnosed correctly when you actually have your visit.
Michael, Maggie, you guys have both thought a lot about the sort of patient role in front of the doctor. Here's another group that we haven't really talked about.
I would say that, the problem is the average doctor used to interrupt patients in 18 seconds and now it's 23 seconds.
It's progress.
and I've been talking to COVID long haulers, and I would suggest that when you talk to the curriculum and you talk to Denise about how to handle a pandemic, one of the things that surprised, shocked, saddened me was still how difficult it is for even primary care doctors to listen to the patient. And the two of the COVID long haulers I spoke to, both women, both in their 30s, both very articulate, and they weren't listened to about their symptoms by women primary care doctors, no better than the men. Younger doctors no better than the older doctors. I said, were the women better? And they said, yeah. Both women said, yeah. The women were nicer about not listening. And I would say that this comes from the culture and not trusting the patient's body. Even when you're a doctor who becomes a patient, they experience the same things. And so I would encourage that as we treat medical schools how to deal with a pandemic, to have them understand that when there's a lot of unknown things, listening to the patient about their body is really, really even more important than usual. And I hope we get to that point.
Yeah.
Maggie, I'm going to let you have the wrap on this topic.
Sure. I'm not sure it has to be a doc. I think it's really a matter of knowledge. And so it could be any kind of health practitioner that could. And the other thing to think of is, remember, everything is about the money now, right? Doctors that do hospice don't get paid very well. Doctors that do palliative care don't get paid very well. And so I think you have to align the incentives if you want to have that to happen.
Amen.
And just to piggyback on that, that's one of the big things. For example, when we're talking about bringing innovation into hospitals and talking to CFOs at hospitals and the folks that deal with finances. And so one of the approaches from an innovation perspective is to align that, to say, well, here are some new centers of revenue or patient revenue that can come in. And I hate to be callous about it, but the money helps the pipes move. And so one of the things to think about from an innovation perspective is, if you're bringing something new into the health system, at least in the United States, what are some ways that you can align incentives so that you can get what you want while giving the folks that have the cash what they want. And that's a really, really big challenge. And that's certainly something that, people focus on quite a bit.
All right, so we're almost at the end of our hour here. I'm going to quickly go around the horn and ask everyone for a quick comment on what they're expecting in the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to start with Michael.
A week before Election Day, Trump is going to infect Vice President Pence with the coronavirus, going to give him a vaccine, and beforehand, he will be completely immune and then also cured. Mrs. Pence will be cured by monoclonal antibodies, and Trump will win in a landslide. But if this doesn't happen, he's going to lose.
One way or the other, place your bets. Maggie.
I think Trump will become even more apoplectic, have a stroke, won't be able to move half of his body, and can't talk.
Can he not dance? Or did he already have the stroke while he was dancing?
I don't think he can. I don't think he dances somehow.
You missed the dancing thing on TikTok, right? Fard, you don't have to talk about Trump, by the way.
Tonight's the debate, so I expect a full-on embrace between Biden and Trump. No, I don't expect that. I just expect, honestly, with the election coming up in a couple of weeks, I expect complete chaos. and an election that won't end for weeks and weeks and weeks. So I think we should get prepared for that. Mail-in ballots that have been tossed in the garbage and people trying to retrieve them. So I think it's going to be interesting times next couple of weeks.
Denise, your forecast for the next couple of weeks?
I expect that coronavirus will increase. I expect that people are going to take more risks during the holidays. But I expect that we are going to have a vaccine, and that we're going to have more people engaged with taking it than we see right now today.
Yeah, that's optimistic. I don't think you think about the next couple of weeks, but in the next few months that's coming. Well, I'll just close with my thoughts that something we haven't touched on much today, but we are at a very interesting time in the balance between the economy, the stock market, and the election all at the same time. This is going to have reverberating effects throughout the healthcare system, and we still haven't really seen a significant change in how healthcare organizations get paid. We're seeing some changes. We talked a lot about this on THCB Gang, but I'm thinking over the next couple of weeks, I think when we get to the election and kind of past it and figure out who's going to be in charge, we're going to see some interesting discussions about this, because we can't go on the way we've gone on through this year. And, whether that means global budgeting or capitation or payment for value or changes, that's going to have reverberating effects, as is the issue about whether we have another stimulus bill and the stock market, recovers and the economy recovers a bit between that, or whether we sort of are in the hole we seem to be going into. So I think the next few weeks, for many reasons, is going to be very interesting for the healthcare system and for the economy as a whole, not to mention society. And Farb was just predicting civil war, I think. So hopefully it's not to be that bad. But certainly 30% of Americans now say they think violence is going to be okay to further their political ends. So I'm a little bit worried. And with that optimistic note, we're done. I want to thank my guests on the THCB Gang for this week. Maggie Carey from the Carey Group in Washington, D.C. Fard John Marr from New York City, from Inspectos. Michael Millinson, President of Health Quality Advisors from the wilds of Illinois. And Denise Pines from Southern California. It's been a great conversation. I will thank you all for listening, and I look forward to seeing everyone on the THCB Gang for episode 30, which happens a week from today. Thursday, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. Matthew Holt signing off, saying thanks for listening.